Om Shanti, good evening. Welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. And our topic today is exploring the value of time and valuing time. And we're going to begin with a reflection. As I'm seated here, am I completely in the present moment? My attention fully in this moment? Do I feel anything pulling on the mind from the past or from the future, whether very close or distant? Or am I fully aware of being in this space at this time? So often, our mind succumbs to the pressure of time rather than experiencing the value of time. When there's the pressure of time, I can feel my mind becoming heavy, racing, sometimes overwhelmed or anxious. And if there is the value of time, it doesn't mean I step away from anything. It just means I'm able to make full use of the present moment, understanding how that shapes the future, and understanding how that can heal the past. Shifting from the pressure of time to experiencing the value of time. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. And so we have been exploring these lovely slogans. And so we'd like to share what the slogan is that we are going to be exploring today. Know that time is valuable. Use it in a worthwhile way, and you will not be deceived at any time. It's interesting. I mean, we do hear a lot of, you can say, famous quotes out there that that time is precious and we use it in a worthwhile way. This last piece about you will not be deceived, I find quite interesting. And I'm not sure if you were able to elaborate on that and if that is related to this pressure of time versus value of time.
Yes, when we experience the pressure of time, we actually can't fully use time in an effective way. And I'm remembering, I might have shared this story before, but I'm remembering, I think one of the most powerful examples of this that many have experienced is the idea of cramming for an exam. And so I remember there was, in college, there was an exam coming up. It was quite intense. It was in math. It was an exam on trigonometric functions of calculus. I remember nothing from that unit now, but I remember at that time that seemed like a really complicated body of information. And I was very aware of that. I was aware of the date of the exam. We all were, of course. All the students are aware of the date of the exam. And I remember the feeling of, I will have to use my time in really an effective way. Cramming is not going to work. Use my time in an effective way so that I can really be at the best in that moment of the exam. And I remember looking at, I was in a university where it had these little colleges, so each had their own libraries. So they were little communities. So I was very aware of what my classmates were doing because we're all studying in this little library for our particular college. And I was aware, and it was fun. I simply thought that, wow, they've mastered this information because I really am going to have to study because no one was studying, actually. I noticed that they just weren't studying. They were doing other things. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. They are so smart. I really need to pace myself. And the exam came, and we all wrote the exam, and the majority were below 30%. And I found a very interesting moment. Now, this is very common where students will cram for an exam, and it's such an odd use of time in general. It's it goes against the whole point of learning something. So, because we know cramming has a very low retention. So is that the best way to do it? And what will happen when I actually take the exam? So I saw with these students that over a long period of time, which is a very common phrase in our spiritual practice, over a long period of time was not being observed, and it was cram and then fail. So it was a very interesting thing to observe, and I'm not sure what goes on in our psyche. And I think that, quite frankly, the information was so overwhelming, many were terrified and avoiding. Until the last moment, they did the best they could to cram, but it was really, you could tell, terrifying. And how can we address the fear, the avoidance? There's so many aspects that come up around the use of the term time, as if other tensions or currents are hiding behind this phrase time. So in the Raj Yoga Center, we often hear souls, I don't have time for the course. But what's hiding behind that phrase? What are they going to use the time for instead? So, and then when a crisis hits, when that moment comes, I don't have the resources because I didn't have time earlier. But was it that I didn't have time, or it was a bit frightening? And then I'm going to be really frightened when things happen. So it's an interesting term that's used in a variety of ways. And yes, we can be deceived at the moment because we have this very strange relationship with time, particularly over a long period of time. Very interesting relationship.
It's interesting because perhaps maybe in theory, it makes sense. Of course, you want to learn something, practice something over a long period of time, but our behaviors don't really reflect what seems like it's quite sensible, no?
It is. And again, so we have to ask what kind of tensions underneath might be sabotaging what appears sensible, which I think after all becomes the story of our lives, that not just around time, but all of our treasures or resources, we may not always use them in a sensible or worthwhile way. And it's not that we need to feel bad or guilty, but we're invited to explore what is going on inside that I'm sabotaging myself from moving forward in a sensible or worthwhile way. What's happening inside? So it's a great opportunity to explore, whether it's fear or desire or attachment, what's going on inside.
It's quite interesting that, that when there's fear, there is still a lot of time I could do something, but as if one is paralyzed and they can't even step forward.
So I like this part of the slogan, this worthwhile, using it in a worthwhile way, because it's based on this idea of self-worth. So if I really want to cultivate the value of the self, that is revealed by my relationship with time and thoughts and these various resources. So when I really have that sense of my own value or worth, it's okay if I notice, I seem to be avoiding this. What's going on? So I have this sort of honest dialogue with the self. And if it's fear, then I will use the time to address the fear because I have that respect for the self, the worth. So the underlying, sort of the deepest foundation of using any resource, including time, in a worthwhile way is going to rest so much on my relationship with the self.
When you're sharing that was, this has come up a lot for me, but it's kind of like, I know this might not sound relevant. Someone is super thirsty and you're giving them a place for food, right? But like, I am not needing food. I need a drink of water.
Right.
But like at the moment when there is such paralysis from fear, to actually address the fear would be such a useful use of that opportunity in that moment. And perhaps maybe we just don't have the equipment.
Yeah, lack of options can be a big problem. But I've always sort of found that when I really am open, like even if I don't quite know what to do, I just sort of acknowledge I feel overwhelmed right now, or I feel afraid, or I feel uncertain. If I'm honest about it, and if you will, a little bit, I don't want to say letting go, but very open, somehow the resources come, somehow a response comes. I don't want this to sound really kind of strange or occultish, but somehow something, it's as if that energy of being open attracts something different. Some sort of option or resource comes. I think that's even how I landed up coming across the Raj Yoga Center, is that there came a point when I was just very, very ready, if you will, very open, very honest, didn't have the answers, didn't know what I was looking for, but just very open. And that openness seems to remove some of the barriers that are blocking solutions coming to us.
I feel that this this topic brings up a lot of other things that are quite relevant. Because I was thinking about someone who is overwhelmed at the moment and not able to do something about it. And yet for different people, it's, what that experience is like is such a variety. And I'm going to bring up your mom, actually. Because I remember you had mentioned that when she moved into this one house, and she's like, "Oh, the walls are bare. Let me just paint." And I don't know if she's ever painted before, but the things that she paints, we're talking about like, I don't know, 7 feet by 4 feet. These are not small paintings. And for someone else, they'd be like way too overwhelmed to even do anything, right? And they would put it aside. And I'm wondering what would be going on inside the soul that makes one different from the other. What internal capacities, perhaps, that one would actually, because it feels like it's that first step that seems to be the most challenging.
And I think that's why I really appreciate something like Raj Yoga, because rather than us just feeling bad or becoming violent, to force ourselves to do things, it invites us to look at the foundation. And the suggestion is the foundation is always going to be something we call purity. In children, it's amazing how fearless they are. Even if I'm always in awe, I've got one client I remember in fitness who we were practicing handstands. And when you're practicing, you just sort of fall over, and you can fall in any direction. You could fall backwards or forwards or sideways. Adults are absolutely terrified of doing this. But this one particular client who is an adult, she's Oh no, I'm always following. And I watch, and she isn't a splat. And she's like, but it's fine. I don't mind. And that fearlessness is just a wonder, So with little children, there's so much purity that they are what we call fearless. This is why they can learn. I think why walking even happens, because they fall multiple times. And that purity of heart kind of starts to, we all had it, but it starts to sort of fade away. Mm-hmm. So Raj Yoga looks at, let's restore that purity of heart. Let's restore that. That's going to help a lot in dealing with these other ways that is manifesting, the things we might think or say, but underneath it all, we've sort of disconnected with our authentic self that's quite fearless and open and creative and courageous. All these things that we call the greatness of the human spirit are natural when the heart is pure, and that enables us to not feel so overwhelmed.
When you're sharing for whatever reason, and you may have to share it again, the Pink Panther, the Panther story. And why I was thinking about it in terms of the slogan about using time in a worthwhile way, you will not be deceived.
I was deceived.
Just maybe just to bring a very quick summary, you had this beautiful poster.
Yes, it was beautiful.
Panther, but you decided, no, I'm not going to color it. I'm not going to hand it. But it was such a beautiful drawing from what you had shared. And that extra step, that extra time, but that in a sense, I would say maybe you look back, I'm not sure what you think, but it's just like you could have went all the way.
Yeah, no, I had a similar situation in university. I think it was a bit more clear at that point. And this is completely revealing myself to whoever might be listening. But I could tell in both, there was a little bit of, again, we want to look at the underpinnings. It was a little bit of ego, actually, that especially I could see it in the second incident, which was even more hysterical. We were preparing in college a paper. It was a Pink Panther moment again.
Oh, by the way, for those who didn't hear, what happened is she submitted it, and you could have gotten.
It was so it was. This is dating myself completely. Recycling was just starting to emerge in the world, and so this was junior high. They were starting to introduce recycling programs into the school, and they wanted to have a poster contest to promote the recycling. And I enjoyed arts and crafts, so I decided I would enter, and my science teacher was on the judging team, and she was very supportive. And I don't know what the Pink Panther had to do with my concept, but it involved drawing the Pink Panther and maybe Inspector Clouseau, who knows? And it was on pink poster board. That's kind of important because it's pink, right? So we drew everything, the concept, and then I know that feeling, and many may have done it, where you just feel like rather than taking a moment to recharge or reset, it was like, oh, it's just too much work. It's almost as if you feel insulted. A little voice saying, you should really do this a little bit more. It's like a part of me goes, no, I've done enough. It looks good enough. Stop insulting. Anyways, we did not color it in. We thought, well, it's on pink paper, so it will look pink. And I remember my science teacher coming up to me and saying, you would have won the poster contest if you had just colored in the Pink Panther. And I was like, oh, and you could feel ego just pinching. So a similar incident happened in university. And again, I could feel it was. So again, it's just a lack of purity. There's such tirelessness, there's such enthusiasm, which is one of the virtues we're looking at this month, such enthusiasm when there is that purity of heart. So it depends so much, and purity is connected to self-worth a lot. We know that when something is pure, whether it's juice or vanilla extract or whatever, that it usually is of a higher price. A higher price is charged. It's considered greater value. Mm-hmm. So we know that about things. Probably the same principle applies to us. And again, it's not to insult. It's really to acknowledge this highest potential within the self, that when we are in that authentic or pure state, we are at our greatest value, our greatest potential.
So in terms of this aspect of purity, what was it did you feel that was compromised in terms of purity? You decided not to paint the Pink Panther.
Well, I know there's always that feeling of, again, a little bit of ego that basically, I've done the best I can, and this little voice saying, but you can actually do more. It's like, no, it's wonderful, it's great, I've done the best I can. This aspect that we need to really self-correct, which ego doesn't like it. I felt that kind of energy inside, and definitely felt it in the second incident.
Would you say that because it's these inner dynamics, because there is a difference from someone who micromanages just to make things perfect, or versus the situation you were in?
Yeah, when you know that you have a capacity, and we want to unlock that capacity without violence. So we're looking at a very specific alignment that really challenges us, because we're used to getting more out of ourselves by being very violent and push yourself. And then we say, no, I want to treat myself well. I'm gonna lay off. And quite frankly, we do need to stretch. We do need to stretch to be able to transform. We've had sessions on tolerance, which ego does not like at all. So we do need to stretch. So how to encourage ourselves to stretch to what we're capable of without the force or violence. This is really what challenges us.
That's really interesting. I guess it was making me think about this aspect of accuracy. I've had to do some accounting, but it's, and accounting requires that the numbers add up, basically. And, but just when you're sharing, I was thinking a lot about the inner dynamics, about, again, when is it just about being strict, just because it involves other people, I guess you could say, when it comes. I mean, this is just an example. There's a team of individuals doing a project of some sort. And when is it that it's, where it's like, but I know, the project could be better. Right.
Yeah, I think it's often more clear to us when it's a voice from another team member, and I've had that happen where which was the second incident was definitely this, where they will say, well, it would be really good if we could do this as well. And then it's very clear that it's the ego that's been hit. It's the same as what happens internally. It would be better if you could do this, but it's a little bit more difficult to see when it's an internal dialogue. But when it's coming from someone outside, it's like, oh yeah, no, that's definitely my ego's been hit. And don't they know how much I've done? And why don't they do themselves?
Right. Or it's my way, and there can be a better way.
But I remember you brought up my mother, and she, one thing she liked to do, and for anyone who has does knitting, they might relate to this. So she liked to knit. She was phenomenal at it, and knitting clothes. And I used to watch, she would get quite far along in a sweater and then notice that there was a slipped stitch or something had gone off, and she would unravel almost the whole sweater sometimes in order to start again and do it accurately. I'm looking at this like, wow. And I never felt any disappointment or negativity in her vibration as she's doing this. It was, I was actually in awe of this energy. It was so pure, as if not disturbed whatsoever. Whereas others would say, oh, no, it's good enough. Let's see. But she was like, no, actually, there's a mistake there. But it's a very specific energy, and it's just so pure that there's no disturbance. No, there's no disturbance whatsoever. And I really have had many instances in the recent that what we call the Pink Panther euphemism, been really, I'll just say in my head, it's a Pink Panther moment. And I know exactly what it means. It means, okay, don't let ego, because you can feel the heaviness coming. Oh, I should do this. To be able to align things properly without heaviness. Mm-hmm. Because what will happen, and it always says, sometimes I'll try to get, I'll finish a project and I can, in my head, I'm like, they're going to come back with this correction. Part of me is like, well, if you know that, why don't you correct it now? Oh, let's see if we can get away. So now, sure enough, everything's good, but can you just change it?
But
so what a waste
you're
of time.
Running out of time.
Well, I'm going to have to use the time later, right? Mm-hmm. So it is.
But I think that's where ego comes in.
So we use the phrase time, but there's actually other dynamics underneath that are being disguised behind time. Mm-hmm. Because it really is just address this, but address it so lightly, with such lightness, with such love and joy, rather than, oh, I should do the violence, the force, the heaviness. So then we start to have a very difficult relationship with time. We'll say, but I don't have time. Whereas I've noticed lately, whenever I feel it's getting very overwhelming, and let's do this properly, I have to be extremely present. Multitasking is the enemy.
Oh, yes.
Of doing things accurately. I have to be completely present and just reconnect with that pure love. I love what I'm doing. I feel very fortunate. Everything I get to do. I mean, I loved creativity. The Pink Panther should not have been a problem. Mm-hmm. But when ego steps in and starts to create these interesting thoughts in the mind, including I don't have time, then things go sideways.
I think that's why perhaps for me, I can't listen to a class or something while I'm doing something else. Mm-hmm. If you watch me, mm-hmm. you'll probably roll your eyes because I would literally rewind. I don't even know what they're talking. What's the point, And I think that was like myself when I was younger. This is before being in the study, but I don't think it was the greatest attention because I would have to read something many times to understand. And I'm not one who likes to skim because I've lost the point already. So you've lost me there. So I'm just like, why bother reading further? Because I don't even know what you're talking about. There's no meaning behind it.
So I think that's really when we come to the value of time, to give value to what's happening in this moment is an art, to really be present. And we are living in a world that doesn't really support that. Souls have so much they have to achieve, so much they have to do. There's a to-do list, there's multiple things going on. We're sort of doing this to each other in some ways. And so, I remember before, the Industrial Revolution, and you had the craftsmen, and, they'd create one piece of furniture, kind of like your cake. One piece of furniture, took however long it took. And then there was the realization we can create this many in this amount of time for profit. So there's that time word. But what's actually going on is we're distorting our connection of value with action. Mm-hmm. So now it's time is money versus the value of the act. And to be able to just, I enjoy what I'm doing. Many craftsmen died away because they did not want to lose that beautiful relationship between value and action, love and the act or what's being done. So I find often it's like, let's be in the present moment. I love what I'm doing. Don't pile everything onto the head. I have to do this. Write down what you need to do so that it's there. You don't have to think about it. And then focus fully. What am I working on in this moment? And this art is lost. It's really not supported by how we're living our lives. So we're really distorting that relationship with time. And it's ego again that's forcing this.
Now, on a deeper level, and I'm glad you mentioned this, but so we're talking about things that we do, and I can perhaps maybe see how does this look like in terms of our everyday lives. And when it comes to just, for example, what being on a spiritual journey, or when you're finding meaning and purpose, do you find that it's similar in the sense that you need to take that time to, to really reignite what matters, keep that enthusiasm going, keep that focus going? But many are like, well, I don't have time for that. I don't see productivity. I don't see progress in my journey.
So again, if you will, what's behind the sabotage, if you will, is ego.
Mm-hmm.
So ego can get a very immediate hit by outcomes, whereas spirituality focuses on income, almost the exact opposite. So given a choice, very often spiritual, let's go and do some stuff. Let's go do some service projects, let's go do some stuff, versus what we actually saw, ironically, at the beginning of this organization was over a decade of really doing nothing when it comes to outcomes. There were, of course, outcomes, but we compare it to just planting the seed and establishing a root system underground. The foundation didn't look like much was going on, but they really developed this beautiful relationship with using time in a worthwhile way. In this moment, we need to use the time to do this deep inner work that is completely incognito. Ego doesn't like it because it doesn't look like anything's happening. But over time, you see the importance of having used the time that way. This foundation continues to thrive and grow and overcome challenges because its foundation is so strong. So the organization continues to grow, continues to operate and flourish because that foundation, that time was given to the foundation. So, I see this on a very basic level in fitness, that when souls are asked to do an exercise, and I remember once we had an instructor. There are certain instructors and participants who enjoy the hidden work, knowing that over time, it will produce better results. In the long run, it will be better. So we had an instructor subbing a class. It was an interval training class, very high intensity. And he really likes to take time to explain, set the foundation. So he was about to have us do an exercise across the floor. And I knew this about him, whereas the other people in the class may not. So they're used to going to the class and just go, just pick up equipment and start throwing it around, whatever. So we go in and he's just doing the warm up, which already is frustrating them because they want to get to the main attraction. And he's about to get us to do some body weight exercises. And he's starting to just explain and demonstrate. Here's what you're going to do. This is what you probably want to do. Don't do that. This is the correct alignment. And I'm listening because he's actually quite got a wealth of knowledge to share. So I'm listening and I can see, and he's noticing people are starting to do the exercise without actually getting the information. And he finally just said, look, can you just stop? Can you just wait? Can you just listen? Like he actually had to do this, which was very rare. And you could just feel it's like, so very often in fitness, when we're telling people about the exercise, they just want to get going. They just want to rush into it. It's not accurate. It's not aligned. They're not going to get full benefit from the exercise. They might even do the wrong exercise because they go off doing what they think they're supposed to do. So it happens quite frequently. And this is just an approach we have. We feel like I've got to rush into things. Whereas this organization was, no, we have to take time to create a foundation because it's going to be very important in the long run.
So in terms of that piece, making that choice that I want to take the time, there's certainly going to be backlash. Let's not talk about, like physical external circumstances. We're talking about internally. I make a choice that I really want to make my spiritual foundation strong. There's no show. There's nothing to show for it. Ego is not happy. So how do I sustain myself? How do I use time in a worthwhile way?
Self-worth. that pure feeling towards the self. I had this incident, it's tomorrow morning, invited into a meeting with really, the heads of the organization, but it coincides with another event that's very incognito, very quiet. And I was really sitting with it, and my heart was like, I want to do this for myself. I want to do the incognito thing. And not that I'm not saying it's showy at all. I think they both would be beautiful, but I know I need to do this incognito. And it might mean that no one's aware of my involvement. It didn't. And I remember writing to the chair and explaining that this is what I had chosen to do rather than attend the meeting. I'm going to be in meditation at that time. And it's very sweet response, very, very sweet. And I think that when we really make these decisions from a pure place, out of that love for self, that respect for self, it's amazing how things will support it. So it's going to come back to that deepest form of purity, which is self-respect.
I remember when I would go visit my parents, and usually I would go into the evening. This is a while back. And I would always, by the time it gets to 7 o'clock, I got meditation right now. I never compromise that to the point where they'd be like, oh, no, you've got meditation right now. You go, you go and you can come back when you're done. But I remember a senior student, Mohini Didi, had talked about that. If you are doing things from a place where it's beneficial for yourself, it's not a fear of compromising anything or pleasing anyone, but others really start to feel that they cooperate, they support them.
Yeah, I think, but, and it may not be immediate either.
Yeah.
It might be over a period of time, but yes, it's always going to come back to purity, always. And again, this purity towards the self, the self-respect, very pure feelings for the self, really recognizing the value of the self. Let that guide how I use time. Because again, there's things hidden behind.
I think that's where we jump to, is wanting support out there. And why it touched me about that example I shared was really not about that as much as, do I do things, because even helping others can be deception as well, at the cost of yourself.
Right. And so this is perhaps the best use of time, is to check the invisible aspects going on as I'm about to do something, because this starts to interact with the law of karma, which is intention. As I start to do it, take a moment, pause for a moment and check what's driving this activity. What kind of energy? Is it ego? Is it desire? Is it expectation? Is it neediness? What's driving it? Because it will. You're planting a seed. And over time, that seed will bear some sort of fruit or whatever it bears. So it's worthwhile use of time to slow down a little bit and check in.
I would say that I know that we're running out of time. But when you mentioned, we started late, but when you mentioned about the self-worth piece, that I really had to really know myself to be able to really want to choose something that is incognito, that creates a foundation.
We have a saying, and I really love it, because it talks about the future reward or return. So that is inevitable. That's a law of karma thing. What I do in this present moment is shaping the future. But then we have something called instant fruit. So there's the future fruit that will bear fruit from the seed I plant. And then there's the instant fruit. And this is the idea that, even though there's no outcome or manifestation, but I actually enjoy planting pure seeds. Like just the act of planting pure seeds is enjoyable. So we call it instant fruit. And we see this in, again, in fitness. There's some that only get enjoyment, and they're very interesting, fascinating conversations, only get enjoyment when it's very obvious, overt outcomes. I lifted this weight, or I ran this speed, or I, jumped up this high, or whatever the case, these very overt outcomes. And then there's some who enjoy the inner work, the alignment, the invisible aspects, the course, but they like the feeling of working on those more foundation aspects of movement just for their own sake. They just love doing it. They don't need the outcome. They just love doing it. And it does affect longevity. One of the aspects we're looking at is brain health, because it's huge right now, brain health. And some absolutely no focus whatsoever on caring for their brain health. It's a very difficult thing because it's going to be over a period of time before you start to see the brain health degenerate. So you're doing something now, and who knows when you'll get to see the results of what you're doing. You have to enjoy it for your own sake. So I'm doing choreography now. Yes, I understand that it might support my brain health. That's lovely. So we actually refer to it as a nice side effect rather than the main motivation. But I actually enjoy doing choreography for its own sake. And one of our main students, Mama, she used to refer to this idea that, yes, I know that the future result of my current efforts will be lovely, and that's very nice. But the instant fruit is really what she was enjoying. You know, the experience of becoming was so enjoyable. And I think that's connected to self-respect. Ego doesn't like it.
You'll need a lot of that to override.
Yeah. Really don't need the show or the outcome or the recognition. That I just enjoy it for the sake of doing it, you know. So it's instant fruit. There's intrinsic reward is what we often say.
Well, I always find that we just pick up momentum near the end. And but
we've run out of time.
And we know everyone
and we value your time.
We'll have a reflection.
How would I like to use this moment? What thought would I like to hold in my mind and experience in my heart? Rather than racing ahead to what I need to do or what's happening tomorrow or even into the past, in this moment, knowing that whatever I think in this moment creates a ripple effect, has an impact on my future. What thought would I like to create right now? And what if that thought focused on celebrating the wonder of the self? Not the roles, not the possessions, not the positions, not the people, not the stuff I have, but just pure self. Taking a second right now to acknowledge the wonder of the self, because I am life itself. There's nothing more valuable than life itself. Making this moment sacred by acknowledging the sacredness of the self. I, the living being, taking time to connect with the self in such a deep, meaningful, and sacred way. Plants a very pure seed that can grow into my future. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. So I always welcome questions. You're always welcome to type questions, comments in the chat box on Instagram or YouTube. And please also let us know if you can hear. That's the most important thing. And so otherwise, this would be a waste of your time. And so in terms of new sessions, there is a new Raja Yoga course that will be offered in May, and that'll be happening on Wednesdays in the evening, beginning with the first Wednesday of May. So that's 4 sessions. But our usual experience sessions, which we always encourage, happen on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Soul Cafe, very lovely session, a variety of spiritual topics, but also spiritual modes in which we actually share these interesting topics. Those are on Saturdays 2 to 3. You're welcome to visit the center's website for other sessions. Thank you for joining.